left for you. Oh, great. There you go. Sit down.
Sounds like these I wish I had a camera stabilizer. Oh well, something for the future, I guess. I'm Mac, and this is Not My Garage. Today, my dad, myself, and our dog are headed out to Henderson, Nevada to go look at a pretty unique car. It's a 1970 Plymouth Custom Suburban station wagon. But first, let me provide you with a bit of context. The C-body was attached to all of Chrysler, Dodge, and Plymouth full-size vehicles starting in 1965. Despite full-size Mopar vehicles existing prior, 1964 and earlier cars were not officially classified as C-body cars. In 1969, the full-size cars received what Chrysler called the fuselage style, with rounded sides and wider overall appearance similar to that of an aircraft. This would then later carry over into 1971 for such vehicles as the Coronet and Roadrunner, and to Dodge's pickups the following year in 1972. Convenient way to mention my 1972 Dodge D200 pickup truck, but I digress. By 1970, the fuselage look had been slightly revised with a front looping bumper, the same as the Dodge Charger. And with the station wagon specifically, you could have added on options such as hidden headlights and even dual air conditioning for rear seat passengers. Now this wagon we're seeing in particular is a custom Suburban, which I can only guess is technically a middle-of-the-road trim package. We've got a base 318 V8 with no power brakes, no power steering, AM radio, and no third-row seating. You got chrome side molding and wheel lip trim, but it has body color steel wheels and hubcaps. But oh well, beggars can't really be choosers on this one, as the production numbers for the 1970 model year, specifically for this custom Suburban, came out to 8,898 units, which sounds like a large number if you had all the cars in one place, but really is dwarfed in comparison by the 725,000 plus production vehicles that were made by Plymouth that year. Personally, this is my first time seeing one with my own eyes, as I've only ever seen this era wagon in photos and media. Now, I will take the blame fully when I say that I didn't capture much footage when we actually spoke with the current owner and of the car when we arrived. My dad had captured some video of me when finishing taking a test drive around the block, a couple more photos, and that was it. To make a long story short, we liked the wagon, but given the issues we saw that it had, there was no way we were going to road trip this home. Technically, we could have, given that there was an auto parts store that existed no more than a mile from the owner's residence. But I work full-time and go to school, and it was a Sunday before the work week. I know. I'd like to make a revive and drive video in the future at some point, but at least not this time. The owner kindly agreed to trailer it to us as he had to stop through the Arizona-Phoenix area later in the week, and U-Haul wouldn't rent us a one-way trailer after inputting the Tacoma info. No! Oh my goodness, I can't believe it fits too. And still about a foot and a half of room. Well, here it is. It has a 318 two-barrel, 727 torque plate automatic, and I still have yet to do enough research to figure out what's in the rear end. She's going to need a lot of work. The Arizona and Nevada climate have taken their toll really on just about every aspect of this thing, and so it's gonna be a project. So we're just gonna start really slow, go over some basic maintenance, plugs, wires, points, coil. I have a couple pieces that are pretty much the same for this 318 as were for the 316 in my truck. So I'm able to just throw parts at it and that'll save me some money that way. But for the sake of it being here, this is my first time actually even seeing a wagon and having a wagon. Really cool. You also could option it out to have this roof rack that was here. Every single wagon, whether you got the base Suburban or the Sports Suburban, did get this rear wind deflector that's supposed to keep the rear window clean. And power window was standard. All the luggage did come with the car, so that's awesome. And she's just dirty. I bet if this car could talk, it would have quite a story to tell. So here's what I will say. When I first made the original overview video on my truck, which now has over 3,000 views, big thank you to the 3,000 plus people that have watched the original video. That was 2 years just roughly into actually me owning it. So there was the ability that I had of essentially 2 years of being able to collect and find pieces. That way when I showed the truck, majority of the stuff in the project, so to speak, at least cosmetically was done. This is day one of ownership of this thing. And so this is gonna be quite interesting. I hope to document and film just about everything I can. Even the cigarette lighter's still there. Pretty cool. You could option it up, even the warning buzzer works. So the door is technically still slightly open, but if I close it, then it's off. Anyway, back to what I was saying. The car could also be optioned up to the 440, and then there was two different choices of 383s, one with the 2-barrel, one with the 4-barrel. There we are. And it is a two-way tailgate, so there is a lever that if you pull it to one side, it'll fold down like the tailgate of a pickup. And then when you shut it again, you can flip the latch to the other side, and that way it opens up like a door. But I'm gonna move the vehicle back in the garage, that way I have a little bit more room to work in the front. It was really just a matter of trying to see whether or not that this was even gonna fit in the garage, and thankfully it does. Excuse the plane going overhead, we're right in the flight path to the local airport. But take that out. I'm going to get the spark plug out and you'll see exactly what's going down. Grab a towel because these things still are just probably stupid hot. Oh. Here's what we got. And we got a pretty soot covered base ring. And it's also on the insulation, the ceramic insulation too. Check the plug gap on these. I think these should be 0.035. I'm also gonna get new plugs. Gonna look for just the same ones that I got for the other truck, which I think are AC Delcos. The ones that are in these are Champions, and I just haven't had good experience with them. If you have, good for you, but I have not at all. I was running into a similar issue, and the spark plugs with how they looked in the base ring, as well as the ground strap, looked very similar to what I just pulled out of the number 1 cylinder. So, also too, the alternator is not charging, because the wire is just completely broken off, and I can see exactly where it is. Starts again on the wiring harness. I'm also going to check to make sure that the gap is right. The gap was off on the number 1, so we'll check all the spark plugs. I'm also going to get a couple cans of seafoam, and that way we can just run that through the carburetor and hopefully blow out some smoke or some garbage that's in these cylinder walls. And we will go from there. We're just going to go ahead and do a quick cut of going to the store and coming back. Well, I got my little box of stuff. That was instantaneous. I got my little box of stuff. It's chilling out there in the back of the truck bed, but leaving Napa Auto Parts. I will say that I have had a slew of good experiences with any of the stores, but given the fact that I'm closest to Napa, these guys rock. I don't think I've ever been disappointed with a single part from Napa. And if, let's say, there was some, I think one time I had a belt that was stretched, but they were more than happy to return it. Didn't have any issues there. Now, excuse me, this is the first time I've ever decided to drive and film at the same time. Pretty decent, I guess, going down the road. So, here's what we got going on. Back from the auto parts store, I got myself a little box. I got some seafoam, some carburetor cleaner. I did pick up myself a new air filter, which we'll probably just put this on, put the air filter back on and call it a day and say that the job is done. Never mind the fact that it's got multiple leaks from the valve covers and intake manifold. We'll just throw the air filter on there and call it a day. Be good. I also got myself a belt because the belt that's on here is pretty dry rotted. Can't imagine that if I had actually driven this back home, how far we get down the road before it decided to just sling itself off. And also too, I got myself ordered, I didn't have them there, I had to order them for tomorrow, but I got myself an upper and lower radiator hose. This one seems alright, I guess, it's still squeezable. The bottom one is really pretty much just rock hard. So that's gotta go. We're gonna do a coolant flush there. Also gonna wait a little bit to do an oil change. Probably gonna put in some seafoam, which I bought a couple cans, and throw that down into the valve cover there. And that way we can slosh some of that around, and hopefully the seafoam will go in there and work to pick out some of the gunk and crap from the lifters and push rods and all that stuff on the springs, and try to get all that to go down. That way when we do the oil change, you can grab as much stuff as possible. Go ahead and crack open a can of this stuff and pour it on in there. We'll have to look at the fuel gauge just because the fuel gauge doesn't work. Well, all the spark plugs are done. I just made sure to check the gap again prior to putting each one of them in. Some of you guys in the comments might scold me for using a torque wrench to put in spark plugs, but I just wanted to have them at least all torqued down in the same way. That way I can keep a close read to make sure that each of them are performing the same. But that's just the way that I wanted to do it, so. Right, and the most important part, here we go. Fully restored, brand new. Oh yeah, there we go. Let's fire it up and see how she does. Alright, so here's the mess we got going on right now. I'm trying to take off the electrical tape that is exposed these two wires that go to either end of the alternator. And I'm looking here that there's a blue one and a green one, but I see that up towards the external voltage regulator that there is a green wire. So that was replaced. You can see that there's a splice that's right there. So then I know that it is the blue wire that I then have to cut off an end and refit on this piece right here. And even though this has cracks in it, this is what I'm gonna have to do for now to at least get the alternator to a state of charging to see if it's even gonna charge the battery and if the alternator is even good. Well, never mind my super terrible little crimped piece. And you can't see it in the dash because none of the dash lights work currently, but the alternator is in fact charging and it does show on the gauge. So that's good. I'll probably just wrap the area with some black electrical tape that I have, that way to conceal it, not to make it any more of an eyesore than it already is. Bummer, man. Bummer that somebody had to cut into the wiring harness, but you know what? It is what it is. I also replaced the rotor. I took off the cap. You gotta see this. This is weird. Pointing up at a 90-degree angle. Now, if somebody in the comments can explain to me why this is like this, if it was done on purpose, or if this is legitimately how it is, and it's just a different style of rotor, let me know, but I've never seen this before. But it took out a little bit of that nasty stumble that it had. I'm still gonna check out the points in the condenser, which I have brand new ones. There's a lot of little goofy things about this wagon. I'm missing a stud on the exhaust manifold here. I'll have to go to the junkyard and try to find one there. Now I'm going to undo the negative terminal cable with battery, and then we're going to take off the air cleaner and get the points out of there and look at the points. Okay, it's off. Look at that. Look at how easy that comes off. That's what I'm talking about. Here's the points. There is just a whole bunch of gunk and dirt that's on that rubbing block, but actually opening them up, these look actually to be fairly new. They don't look super corroded or pitted. So here is how I go about properly measuring the gap in the points. I just so happen to have a spare distributor, so this will be better for illustrative purposes. I've snugged down the points with a flat blade screwdriver and made sure that the rubbing block is seated against the lobe of the distributor. Using a remote starter I have, slightly turn the motor over until the points are opened by one of the 8 sides of the center lobe. If this was a slant 6, which was supposedly the base engine for the standard Suburban, the lobe would have 6 sides. This V8 has 8 sides. You get the idea. Then using the same flat blade screwdriver, insert the end into the triangular opening in the retaining plate to either open or close the points. Using a metal feeler gauge, we are going for a gap of 16 thousandths, as the manual specifies a range of 14 to 19 thousandths. Given how point-style ignition systems wear over time, it allows for a substantially larger window of a gap. You can also use a dwell meter, such as the snap-on one I have, to measure for dwell angle, but for this specific instance, I didn't need to use it in that way. Alright, let's start up and see what we get. Come on. And there we go. Let's turn on the lights. Cool. Okay, so fast forward a couple of days, and I ended up having an issue where I didn't have brake lights. The hazards worked, and then they didn't, but the hazards did work, the reverse lights work, the tail lamps work, but I wasn't actually getting any brake lights, so with the tail lights on and the pedal depressed, they weren't getting brighter at all to illuminate. So I basically tore the entire interior apart, just about. I took out the steering wheel, I took out the plastic panels and tried to expose as much of the wiring harness as I could, just checking to see if there's any breaks or areas where it's grounding out potentially. There's a couple areas in the back that I do have to actually probably just cut and recrimp because it's just exposed copper. I think what the issue is somebody in the past had actually messed with this wiring harness here that goes through the steering column and up to a connection on the wiring harness for the dash and the fuse box. This is for the turn signal indicator. And so basically you have the turn signal indicator, and the hazard button. And what happened was these areas on the back were actually cut and crimped. Here and here, where there looked to be another wire cut. But everything that I was looking up for a 1970 wiring harness, at least for the turn signal indicator, was just showing that these two in the back, these two cut wires here, were there, but that this section that's right here, towards the upper end, where these two wires can join to the one, is non-existent. So gotta give credit where credit is due, and I wasn't too sure about the specifics on exactly what to get and how to find this wiring harness again for the C-body, but it turns out that pretty much was universal for 1970 for other makes and models. But the gentleman at Napa Auto Parts helped me out greatly and did not disappoint. Couldn't find it initially in their database, but actually was able to cross-reference a couple different part numbers on other sites, and sure enough he found it and was able to have it here same day. So you guys knocked it out of the park once again. Thank you to Napa. So I have the pedal depressed essentially, and this is the result when you depress the pedal, is that it opens up this point. This is actually facing the other way, but this little plunger pushes out, and it illuminates the brake lights. So I have the back panel removed, but you can see the brake lights on and the brake lights off as I'm depressing the plunger. So now I officially have brake lights. And also, just for the sake of showing, I'll also hit the hazards as well. So that solved that issue. Now I just have to basically reassemble this entire driver's side of the car and go from there. Given the time of day, the only logical next step was to immediately proceed with replacing the intake manifold gaskets. First, I drained the radiator and totally didn't spill a single drop of coolant onto my carpet mat whatsoever. Afterwards, I began removing the heater and radiator hoses. This job is definitely going to be much easier than on my truck, given that the AC compressor has to be removed as well as the alternator due to the fact that the bracketing connects the two, rather than this engine in particular in which it's mounted to the timing chain and water pump cover. Next, it was on to removing the carburetor and its respected choke and throttle linkage. The automatic with this kickdown linkage has a decent number of small washers and cotter pins, so keep track of where you put them. And remember that you might want to take photos so you can put the kickdown linkage back in place correctly. Remove the coil and distributor next. Making sure to make a note of where the rotor is pointing in relation to the intake. Marking the vacuum advance line direction helps too. I ran out of cardboard from last time, so I'm just using a piece of paper, but that's how I'm going to actually mark where the bolts go, make sure they go back in the same spot. So I want to get all the bolts backed out, just enough to where I can actually grab them. I don't have to then twist them out. Make it easier for me since this will be number 2. I mean, can you think of a better time right now than to be tearing apart an engine? Because I sure can't. This is extremely black and gunked up. Man, look at all that. Careful now, careful. Come on. Okay, now don't drop it on the fender. Yeah, it looked like a good place for it. I was kind of tired of holding it, but here it is. Super soot covered, gunked up. Just a little memento that I can always look back on. This shot right here. Definitely gonna need an oil change and maybe some internal engine cleaner. Alright, it is currently 1 in the morning and I spent a decent amount of time actually cleaning the intake. A lot of the stuff on the front side, you can't see it, I have it flipped over on the cooler. That way it makes it easier so I don't have to bend down as far to pick it up to put it on. A lot of the gunk came off and it actually pretty well preserved. Still a lot of blue paint that's on there, so I think it'll look pretty good going back on. But I do have the gaskets and I do have the gasket maker. And you guys know the next step. But it's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to be applying a little dollop of the gasket material in each of the 4 corners. Specifically these areas where the cork gasket on the front and back end meet with the intake manifold gaskets, because these corners seem to be really big trouble spots and one of the reasons why my intake was leaking on my truck. So after that's said and done, I'm going to then clean up what I have, and that's really all I can do. I don't really have any of the valve cover gaskets. I can put the distributor back in, but I'm still waiting on also the alternator bracketry, and I'm missing a couple of the bolts here and there. So once the intake is on and the distributor is back in, that's essentially all that we can do. And the intake manifold is back on. I just have to get the bolts put back into the intake and tighten down in the proper sequence. But it's back on, and the blue paint, like I said, in the back is pretty well preserved. There's more gunk that's in the front, but I'm running out of brake cleaner, so I'll have to buy more from the store. This project is going to be it for the night. I'm up in the air with regard to valve cover gaskets and waiting on the alternator bracketry, so I can't proceed any further, but it's almost 2 o'clock in the morning and I'm extremely tired. But that'll do it for this video. This will be a part 1. I'm going to make it on the 1970 Plymouth Custom Suburban. As we count down the days and get closer and closer to the Good Guys Car Show, I seek to get this vehicle running and driving in better shape, and also take this and my truck up to the show, as I've never done that before. Thanks so much for watching, and if you made it this far in the video, I greatly appreciate it. Please consider subscribing to the channel. It greatly helps out and really gives me quite the drive to make more content for the channel. I greatly enjoy editing these and putting these together, and I hope you enjoy. Also, leave a comment down below telling me what you like about the car, what you don't like about the car, what you like about the video or not. No matter the case, tell me down in the comments below. And as always, have a good night and take care until next time.